Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Marquette with the American Space Museum, where we bring you a program at this time every weekday where we want to help you stay curious. And we're in our 7th week of providing this little program for you, and we've had some special guests, but today we got a very special one. NASA legend Bob Sieck is going to share with us his experience of launching 52 shuttles, managing the whole shuttle program, and his life is broken as a meteorologist. So stay tuned for all that. But we're glad that you're with us. We are going to open our museum on Monday, June 1st. We will not be open or take advantage of the launch on the 27th by having any vendors or anything like that here. But I attended a meeting today of the Cocoa Beach Chamber of Commerce, and I'll tell you what, all the hotels on Cape Canaveral and Cocoa Beach are sold out, and there's going to be thousands of people here to watch this launch next week, so we can't wait. And Marty Winkle, who's behind the camera, my Apollo hero and shuttle worker, we're going to bring it to you live, the launch next Wednesday afternoon. So we want to, as usual, when there's a birthday, we want to wish a happy birthday. As you zoom in this, these are the people we want to thank for helping you stay curious. Our Executive Director, Karen Conklin, and Marty is virtually our producer. Bruce Jacobs is our IT guy that has solved all these problems to make it a better quality. Angie Roberts is our office coordinator, and Nick Enix is our collection manager that helps show you some of the relics we've been showing over the last week. So kudos to all of them. Marty and I couldn't do this without our team here, and we welcome you back next week. We're going to be very COVID conscious with masks required and temperatures being taken, mostly because most of our volunteers at this wonderful nonprofit are senior citizens, and myself, and we're in the wheelhouse of maybe getting this infection. So we want you to come, but please respect, we want you to wear a mask. Well, we have a birthday today, Marty. It's this gentleman, Tom Akers. Happy 69th birthday to Tom Akers, a 4-time shuttle flyer. Tom was born in St. Louis in 1951 on this May 20th, and he flew Endeavour twice, Discovery and Atlantis each once, and he participated in the historic 3-man spacewalk that STS-49 did to grab an Intel satellite. Incredible pictures, 3 guys out there grabbing this orbiting satellite at 17,500 miles an hour, and that was quite a thing. And he actually did one of his spacewalker mates was Pierre Thuet, whose birthday was yesterday. So they have birthdays back to back, and they also had this incredible experience of grappling a satellite in the payload bay of the space station. So happy birthday, Tom Akers. He became a physics professor, I forget where, but you can find out and stay curious by looking at it on our Facebook page today, where we posted it. And since I mentioned that, we hit 7,000 followers on Facebook this week. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We appreciate people enjoying our space history that we bring you in this little program that will continue after the COVID thing. Well, Marty, I also wanted to mention on this date that one of the astronauts that we lost was a great guy named Dave Walker. He would have been 76 today, and he died in 2001, 19 years ago, of cancer at age 56. And Dave Walker was quite a well-known, popular astronaut on 4 space flights. He was part of the Dog Pound group, or the Dog group. He was Red Dog. This group of one of the space flights, they were all named after dogs. So we'll bring you that history one time. But condolences to Dave Walker, a great guy that would have been 76 today. He died 20 years ago. Launched yesterday was STS-77. Here's the crew of STS-77. All right, led by Dave Casper, is it? John Casper, yeah. And Curtis Brown was the pilot. They would be in space right now in 1996 on Endeavour, and it was the 4th shuttle launch of the year in 1996. Think about that. Just not even June, and they launched 4 shuttles in 1996. So things were going pretty smoothly there 10 years after the Challenger disaster. And also up in the sky today was STS-84 Atlantis. They were launched on May 15th, so right now they were depositing Mike Foale up there for his stay on the Mir space station and bringing back Jerry Linenger. That was the 6th exchange up at the Mir in 1997. And of course we talked about last week, STS-125 was the last Hubble repair mission, and they were in space with Atlantis today in 2009. So in 97 and 2009, Atlantis was orbiting our Earth, and I can't wait to go back and see her again out there at Kennedy Space Center, because I loved it. It's like going to church out there seeing it. So beautiful and so well poised there, the way they have it out there. Well, we have gone through our little intros there, and now I want to introduce our special guest. I wanted to mention that as I introduce our special guest, Bob Sieck. Bob's a guy, I've gotten to know him over 3 years, and he's a man that looks in the mirror in the morning to see that he's not a young man. He's full of energy. Bob brightens up American Space Museum every time he comes in here because he's always so positive, and he always takes time to answer the questions from this space geek. Some of them are probably silly to him, but we love our knowledge of our national treasures like Bob. So I introduce to you Bob Sieck. Welcome, Bob.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be here, particularly at the museum, and thanks again for hosting this program. Yeah.
We'll appreciate it. We have so many wonderful people that want to make this museum go, and he's one of them. Bob was our treasurer. He's our outgoing treasurer now, but been involved in the museum for probably about a decade. We'll talk a little more about that. He, for me, is the man that put Gemini in Gemini, because all of these old school guys from the Mercury and Gemini said Gemini, and the reason being is that Gemini is the constellation and Gemini is the program, and NASA actually had a press release that said it's to be called Gemini Bob, like Jiminy Cricket, right?
That was it, yeah. Gotta pronounce it. And interesting, NASA does acronyms, and we didn't have an acronym for Gemini. Normally we abbreviate things.
All right. Well, I'm going to give a little more introduction, and you'll hear a lot from him as we've got some great questions, and Bob's very willing to talk about his role still in the space program. Bob is a University of Virginia graduate, a Cavalier. He said he was born in St. Louis, but was an Army brat. In the Air Force, Bob was trained to be a meteorologist, supporting missile and aircraft operations. So that had to be a good insight, launching 51 shuttle missions like he did, and looking at the clouds. He came to NASA in 1964, was a spacecraft system engineer for Gemini, and then he worked on the Apollo, and then he was transferred to the Space Shuttle, and that's where he had various roles until he became launch director for 51 Space Shuttle launches, and then he became director of shuttle processing. And I've heard Bob talk about management, and the way managing the whole shuttle was something that far eclipsed being a launch director in many ways. Bob is a very giving volunteer to many boards, Habitat for Humanity. He's on the Astronaut Memorial Foundation and the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. And more importantly, he's involved with our American Space Museum. And Bob's family lives around here, his children and 5 grandchildren. And I love talking to Bob about scuba diving and racing sports cars, which is how you blew off a lot of steam. And ballroom dancing.
Got to stay active.
You got to stay active. So I'll introduce you to one of NASA's highest level management leaders of American taxpayer resources that had human lives at stake. Think about that. Did you have any sleepless nights? Welcome to us, Bob.
Well, there were some of those, but one would think that's a high pressure job, but what everyone should understand is it was a visible job, but it's the team that gives you confidence that everything's going to be okay. Or if it's not, they will be the first to say, Bob, we shouldn't be doing this. Today's not the good day, or I got an issue here that says we shouldn't go ahead. So the team will keep you. You're a manager, but you're only as good as the team that you take care of. And the launch team, the processing team, has always been the mainstay of the success of all of the missions that we have enjoyed. So which really takes the pressure off of management. You just have to set the people up to succeed. That's your responsibility as the boss. And they'll take care of the rest of it.
Well, here's what somebody said about Bob Sieck here. He's the guy you wanted to launch you into space. He made you feel part of a team, and he had that calm voice. And the guy that said that was Dan McCune a couple hours ago, and Dan is our building manager for the facilities here at the museum. But Dan was a crane operator, and he picked up the shuttle and the ET and the SRBs and put them all together. But he said you were the guy that made everybody feel good and want to come to work and launch this sucker.
Well, it's the guys like Dan that made it a fun and relatively easy job. And the point we always made as management was, and I learned this early on as a journeyman engineer, is that everyone is important who's a member of the team. You don't need to be in a control room on launch day with cameras on you, headset on, lights flashing, clock counting to be important. You can work as a crane operator 3 weeks before launch and putting something together with the cranes, and then you sign off the procedure that this is done okay, or you could be gluing a tile on an orbiter weeks or months before launch. Once you stamp that procedure that said that was done correctly, you just gave a go for launch. Just as important as the one the launch director would do at T-minus whatever minutes with the clock counting and the world watching.
But one of those team members was our own Marty Winkle behind the camera, who was a main engine control engineer on console 12 in your firing room back there. So their paths crossed, 30 years later, and that's what I love seeing happen here at this museum. Well, we wanted to make you aware of the fact that there were 8 launch directors, and there's for you to see them there, Bob. The first one was George Page, and he's a legend in the from the Mercury days through Apollo. And then Al O'Hara, and then Bob was the third in line, and he had 2 stints. He took a break. Gene Thomas had, I think, 6 flights there. And then Jim Harrington had 21 flights, all right. And then Dave King came back. Both Bob and Dave King split took a break in between their duties. And then you had Ralph Rowe, was in 98, 99. And then a lot of us know Mike Leinbach, who launched shuttles from 2000 to 2011. Mike launched 36 missions. Bob Sieck launched 51. So between the two of them, they launched 2/3 of our 135 space launches. So that is very impressive. And Bob, what ones of those stick out to you? What's some of your favorite ones?
Well, they were all good for me, first of all, because there was a landing for every launch.
Yes.
And that's the number that really counts in the business of putting humans, astronauts, into space. I think that the toughest launch as launch director, and the most memorable in that position, was the return to flight, STS-26, after Challenger. The team had
1988.
in 1988, right? STS-26. We had been down for a couple of years. Team confidence had been low, obviously, after the tragedy. We changed lots of things. It was roles and responsibilities and equipment. So it was kind of like starting over again in some respects. So it was really a great event, and you can imagine the euphoria from the launch team when everything worked fine, and we were able to get the crew back home and prove that we still know how to do it correctly. The first launch of the shuttle was obviously memorable, because the position I had then was the management of the launch commitment criteria for the shuttle at liftoff, and all the software programs that manage that stuff in the control room. And the biggest concern was some glitch in the software that my team was responsible for was going to keep the launch from occurring, because this was all new to those of us that didn't know computers whenever we graduated from college many years before. So that one was another one. That
40 years ago, next year, Bob, is STS-1.
Yeah.
40 years,
yeah,
wow.
Yeah, that was.
And I'm sure you got a good relationship with Crip.
Absolutely, sure.
Yeah.
And always have. In fact, met him early on, and whenever they were putting together the team and the astronauts for actually the MOLE program back in the 60s, which was a variation of the Gemini program. So
Manned Orbiting Laboratory. Here's a picture of you, Bob, in those early days.
Yeah,
all
I vaguely recognize
got
the
some
guy
nice
with the
hair there. And,
yeah, and a console that looks vaguely.
He's got to the Spacewalk of Fame, our parent foundation in there, and it's fun to know Bob and look at the old footage and look for him and some of our museum friends in that footage in there, and even myself turning all gray like I have. You're going like, wow, I look like that, huh? So that's good. But well, tell us a little bit about. You're going to mention another mission or two, and I know you're friends with the astronauts, and there's particularly some astronauts you've befriended over the years, like Kathy Thornton, you scuba dived with, I understand, and she taught physics at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. And so just a little bit about, that whole environment.
Well, I started out as a biomedical systems engineer on Gemini, and that position, Gemini. Back then, two guys, all astronauts were guys, but the instrumentation that I was responsible for was all the medical sensors that they wore with inside the suit. So I'm in a team there. My responsibility is to make sure that the medical signal gets from the body into the spacecraft telemetry system and back down to the blockhouse and mission control. So as such, with the flight surgeons and the technicians, we would spend hours with the astronauts in the suiting up process in the early years. So you get to meet all those guys pretty well, because it's pretty intimate. They're stripped down, they're skinny,
yeah, I'd say
they're shaving
the
body, and they're telling jokes, or they're grousing about how why they really have to do this, and so you get to meet them. And you get to know a little bit about them. So these were all, the first two classes of astronauts, all the Mercury guys, and then all the Gemini guys.
Still the alpha dog type of
They were
personality.
Definitely, yeah. Positive personality, a certain amount of ego,
competitive.
And very competitive people, but really good at what they did. Yeah, no fuzz on that. So you kind of you understand the kind of people that they are, and this is human spaceflight, and we were reminded as young engineers, in fact, everybody that came on board, you're responsible for these things as a journeyman engineer or a technician or whatever your job is, but this is all about human spaceflight. Our customer is those astronauts that are in the capsule or the spacecraft or sitting on top of the rocket. Never forget what the number one priority is. And management made that, they enforced that by having frequent visits with the astronauts down here at Kennedy Space Center with the launch team, so they could say it's more than just the rocket or the spacecraft. That's important, but never forget what this is really all about. It's the crew and their mission. So social events, that kind of thing, you spend a lot of time with these people, and you find, well, they're human. They're guys and gals, and
families, kids, mortgages,
fathers, mothers. They have the same issues. It's do deal with the same thing.
Did they have a hard time? Did those astronauts have a hard time finding someone to talk to because of the celebrity status? And
well, it's the usual thing, the celebrity status. So demeaning term, but the groupies would surround him. I want an autograph. I wanted to do
Yeah.
you know, this kind of thing. But those of us that were members of the team, they really wanted to.
Yeah,
to
you were the
be
inside
social
friend,
with us.
yeah.
They, you know, and they look for opportunities to be with you. So yeah, human space flight is just that. It's all about the humans.
And we'll talk about the upcoming flight in a minute. I know you made the comment to me several times that being a launch director, yeah, you launched more than anybody, almost 40% of the launches, but you said it was in a way a lot of fun, but what wasn't as much fun is when you were managing the director of the shuttle processing and bringing it all together. So tell us a little about that job you had. Very important job.
Yeah, and as far as the fun factor is concerned, as launch director, you don't have to worry about a large team of administrative issues and personnel issues and budgets and contracts and schedules. The director of the operations takes care of that.
And you became that.
Yes. The launch director is like the on-scene commander. Mm-hmm. in either in some kind of campaign, military or whatever, or fire department or whatever. You tell the people behind the scenes that sit at desks and go to meetings most of the time what you need for the team to be successful, and they go get that stuff. Mm-hmm. And you stay out there with the people doing the work. Once you become the boss behind the desk or whatever, and the carpet in the office, now you got to worry about those resources. Are they set up to succeed? Do they have the right decisions? Do they have the amount, you know, is the budget going to give us the supplies and the resources and the equipment that we really need to do this? Mm-hmm. And that's more of a challenge. Plus you have administrative issues because it's a large organization, so you worry about promotions and reorganizing and this kind of thing. Mm. But in a way it's more rewarding when you see the team be successful in the campaign of processing rockets, spacecraft, or whatever, and the mission goes well. Then you say, well, okay, that's good. You know, I'm doing what I get paid for, and I'm mm-hmm. responsible for. I'm setting them up to succeed out there in the field. Mm-hmm. And so it's really two different jobs. Mm-hmm. But the more time you have spent, particularly for those of us that started out as a journeyman and then went up the organization chart, it's a reminder that you got to know what the team is doing, and having been there, for me personally, really helped. I never failed to learn something when I went out on the floor of a work facility or in the control room and talked to somebody at a console when I had the job when I was up here on the mm-hmm. organization chart. I always learned something.
You're sitting in your launch control chair, by the way. You know that.
Well, it does look and feel familiar.
That's his launch control. It says so on the back there. It doesn't have his name on the back there. But being a meteorologist and probably still looking at the clouds and knowing something.
Oh, yeah.
When John Young said he's scouting up there in that T-38 before the launch and telling you, I don't know about this, Bob. His front looks like it's good. Did you ever say, no, I know it'll be okay?
No. It's I always, working the weather is interesting. When I was in the Air Force, I had already decided back in college that after they launched Sputnik, when I was a student at the University of Virginia, and at that time I was in the Air Force Reserve Officer Training Corps program, and when I graduated, I was going to become a pilot and fly airplanes for the Air Force as a career. That was my goal. But I was taking engineering. So the Russians launched Sputnik, and I had just finished my first trip to Florida. My parents had just moved down here, went out on Cocoa Beach, could drive on the beach back then, you know, and they were getting ready they were doing something up at the Cape. And it was at night, so there's these floodlights on this rocket. You know, I said, you know, that looks like that would be fun, and I could do that by living in this paradise of Central Florida. So I had that thought in my mind, and shortly after that, the Russians launched Sputnik, and I said, well, and we announced, okay, we're going to ramp up our space program. I said, well, that looks like a better deal than flying airplanes for the Air Force, even assuming I ever passed flight school. So when I graduated, I said I don't want to go to flight school. I passed physical, but I want to get in missiles and rockets. And unfortunately, there were no openings down here in missiles and rockets at that time, although the Air Force was pretty much running everything at the Cape. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, Lieutenant, we'll put you in a holding pattern. We'll teach you meteorology for a year, and then we'll look for openings down at the Cape so you can transfer your specialty to the missiles and rockets and do engineering. Well, there were no openings after I got certified as a meteorologist.
Oh.
I said, so we're going to send you into the field, but you can reapply again in another year for that. And they sent me to a base up in North Florida, which was good because it was a test range over the Gulf of Mexico for missiles, surface to air, air to ground, and that kind of thing, as well as forecasting weather for pilots. So I did that, reapplied again, no openings. They sent me to a base out in Arizona where we were putting ICBMs in underground silos.
Oh, wow.
Thank goodness.
The MX.
We never, these were Titan IIs.
Yeah, oh, wow.
Thank goodness we never had to use them. And so all this time I'm getting trained in meteorology, getting proficient with that, and I said, but at the end of my active duty tour, they still didn't have any openings, so I left the Air Force, went to work for NASA. And then I was thinking, well, I hope I didn't waste the first few years of my working career doing meteorology stuff, because I want to do missiles and rockets.
Yeah.
So I got on board with NASA, and I never thought all of that meteorology training would have helped me until I got in a launch director role. By that time, I had also lived in Florida for a couple of decades, so I had a feel for the weather based on my weather training, and particularly of the micro-meteorology aspects of the local area here. So, and then I learned as launch director, well, one of the few decisions in the process that is pure judgment is the weather good enough to go fly? Most everything else, the launch commit criteria is pretty straightforward. It's got to be within this limit, the pressure, the temperature, the voltage, or whatever. If it's out of limits, you're not going to launch. Team, go work it. If it's trending out of limits, then it's hold and evaluate it. But the weather is more judgmental. Well, I've been trained by the Air Force to forecast weather. The Air Force provides the weather forecast for the shuttle launches, so I can talk in their terminology.
Wow, okay.
So most of my really in-depth discussions in launch count, when the weather was marginal, was about the weather. It wasn't about the issues associated with the machine.
You had confidence in your team.
The team is going to tell me whether or not, or we're worried about this, or we're working the issue. And I would, so in hindsight, thanks, Air Force.
Yeah, the forks in the road that you could.
Yeah.
Bob, I've never asked you this. Did you ever think of applying to be an astronaut?
Briefly once, and I said, no, I don't want to. Having known most of them, well, all of them I met, but there's a few of them I knew really well. And I said, no, I don't want that kind of life. I have the exhilaration of flying after training for, pick a time, months, years, or whatever. Fly, then I go back at the end of the line again to go through again. And the jobs that I have down here, the roles and responsibility, I'm involved in every one of them.
Yeah.
I'd rather be involved in all of them.
Good, cool. Yeah. Some of the astronauts, Apollo astronaut Lind waited 19 years for his flight on the shuttle.
Yeah.
Imagine that. Well, that's good, right? Is there something you'd like our guests watching this on Facebook Live to know about your career as a shuttle launch director? Because I want to segue into what's going to happen a week from today. But is there something that that people might be misconceived about, or something that you think we ought to remember about the 30-year legacy of the shuttle?
Well, you have to remember that you're only as good as your next mission, and you can celebrate the one that was safe and successful that you just enjoyed, but the next rocket spacecraft that's out there or is being processed to go out there, it doesn't care if the previous mission was safe and successful. It doesn't know that. So you have to, don't be complacent. treat everything like this is essentially, you know, everything is riding on the work that you do because you're important. You don't have to have a highly visible job to be important in the space program. That's what you need to keep in mind.
Cool.
And that makes it, and don't be afraid, you know, be a team player, communicate with none of the things that have ever been accomplished that we celebrate in the space program, you can point to one individual hero that
Right.
did something. No, it's always a team effort.
And it's true that the American business model that became in the 70s and 80s was drafted from the NASA models of layering your responsibilities. Am I correct?
That's right. And one of the management principles I learned early on, and the early years with NASA were relatively easy because we didn't have any experience to fall back on, so we learned by trying, and everything didn't always work. And when you made mistakes, assume that it's nothing irresponsible. The approach to management was, well, okay, Bobby, you know that you screwed this up, not irresponsibly, but so let's figure out what we management didn't do to set you up to succeed. Is it the training, the tools, the procedures, or whatever? Because tomorrow Larry is going to do a similar type of job. You'll never make the mistake again. You'll recognize this as a slippery spot. You know, no, I'm not going to, you know, we better stop and talk about it. But somebody that does a similar task tomorrow may do the same thing. So let's understand the root cause, how we management can fix this so it doesn't happen again. A very refreshing environment to work in.
That's one of the things I'm glad, I was trying to bring that out, that you really impressed me, that it wasn't my fault. It's like, what did we do to not train you properly, that you screwed up?
Yeah.
And I mean, I've never had a job like that, Bob, I'll tell you that. It was like, there's the door, okay, or one strike in your file.
Well, it's one of the, you know, you talk about, you know, how did we really get to the moon back?
Yeah.
And, you know, what were these enabling things?
You
Well,
couldn't have
one
that
them
fear
was-
of making a
That's
mistake,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, you had to put that aside.
Yeah.
And
Let's go back to the moon. Let's and some of you that have some questions for Bob Sieck, you can put them on our Facebook. We'll be happy to get to Bob and he'll answer them for you via Facebook or we'll email you or something. And we'll certainly have him on at another time maybe. But now we're in the 21st century. Whew. Remember the the 20th century, every
Yes,
Sunday
it
we'd
is.
watch the Walter
Yes.
Cronkite on TV.
Yeah.
Now we're in the 21st century. This man has been on the safety panel board for SpaceX. He's on the NASA Advisory Council that recently he met about the upcoming manned launch. But one story I'd like for you to share with our viewers that was when you and the Rocketdyne legend Lee Solid visited a SpaceX launch pad and the two ladies that you met out there.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yeah. This was, well, it was a couple of years ago now. So here's a couple of us old rocket scientists, you know, guys, and we were doing a tour with retired astronaut and a couple other people, and we encountered these two young ladies on the launch pad. They were having a discussion, or whatever. And we went over to them. I said, "Well, I'm interested in, you know, in the demographics here. I'll call it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been to SpaceX a number of times at their facility out in Hawthorne, and I noticed that I liked what I called the chemistry of the environment, where everybody is the administrative home, from the boss all the way through, you know, the hands-on workforce is on one floor, no private offices, cubicles that are only this high type of thing. And,
Everybody could see each other.
Everybody
really.
can see each other, and yeah, there's people working at computers, but there, it fosters communication when you're in an environment like that. And then the floor below that is where all the work areas are. And I noticed that, maybe one out of, again, perception, 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 of the employees are women, be they technicians, engineers, operations people, or whatever. So these two young women are up there, 3 actually, on the launch pad
Pad
surface.
40?
No, this was Complex 39.
Oh, okay.
And I forget which rocket which mission it was, but there was a Falcon 9 on the pad with a payload on it. And I said, well, just curious. I'm introductions, and I'm just curious in your story. You're here. How'd you get here? What do you do, or whatever? And so they all gave their very brief version of their resume. All college graduates. 1 or 2 of them were advanced degrees, all technical science or math, all in their 20s, and their responsibilities to me were impressive. One of them was that shift supervisor for safety at the launch pad. Another one was the lead engineer for one of the pad ground support systems, the lead engineer for it. And
In her 20s.
yeah, in her 20s. And the other one was, I forget which response, but she had a supervisory role in some capacity out there. And I'm thinking, well, okay, I don't want to get too personal, but and so you're how old, and how, and what's the work environment like? Well, they were all single women. Too busy. Said, yeah, we work a lot of hours, but we're not, none of them had a family. That'll come later type thing. And I said, well, yeah, but you got a lot of responsibility, relatively young. How did you get here from not even being an employee
Right.
3 years ago, for instance? And the various number of years, but they were in from 2 to 5 years. They worked for SpaceX. And one said, well, yeah, I've only been here 3 years, but I've been on the launch team 31 times. Another one said, well, I've done 15, and the other one was 20-something. And I'm thinking, okay, when I was that age as a journeyman engineer back on Gemini, I had maybe 1 launch under my belt. So
And here they got several dozen.
they got so I think about the amount of experience you get, and this is, of course, between launches here at KSC 39 and Pad 40, and of course out at Vandenberg, and they had all done launches out at Vandenberg also, and they all started here, and we're now up to here. And I'm thinking, boy, you can gain a lot of experience when there's that much activity going on. So it has nothing to do with age. Or,
Interesting.
It's the experience, and they were all, yeah, I enjoy working here. I like the fact I got reinforcement. I enjoy the responsibility, and so they're the future.
They're the future. That's a great insight to what SpaceX is all about, and there's some, you didn't think much of them being women, I gather, but just their youth, and that they'd had so many launches too, you told me.
Well, in fact, when I went to engineering school, there were 0 women in my class.
Huh. Well, you should have gone to typewriting class. I was the only boy in typewriting class. In there. So Bob, wow. What do you feel about a week from today? Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken getting on that Crew Dragon, and you've been, tell us a little bit about how you've been, if you've been involved in it directly on this safety panel of SpaceX, but what's your gut feeling about their preparation, and of course these are very experienced NASA astronauts.
Yeah, well, the proficiency of those 2 guys shouldn't be any question at all, because they've been involved for a long time. They're veterans. they'll know what to do. I think what to me it gives me confidence is that the panel I've been on with SpaceX almost 10 years, almost 8 years now.
Great.
And so I've seen I'll call it the maturity of their system, their processes grow over that period of time. And they have learned from NASA and correspondingly, NASA has learned from them on some of the things that they could take to the future of the NASA programs that will still have the NASA oversight that is customary with the programs prior to the commercial crew program getting on board. So I think that it's the whole concept of commercial crew was in hindsight, of course, the proof's in the pudding. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we'll see the result of that shortly here. But the blending of the NASA culture and the NASA experience with the commercial culture, and it is different from a customer contractor relationship is I think it's working. It'll continue to mature, but no question about the preparations for this mission. That everything that's in terms of an issue has been, from the technical community all the way up through the management, has just been pounded as flat as you can to get all the risk out of it that you possibly can.
That's a good idea.
And there's no gambling associated with this mission. There's a difference between accepting a risk and gambling.
Okay, and that is?
And
What's the
because
difference?
accepting a risk is you take your known unknowns, and engineers will find a way to turn that into numbers, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Management will turn it into how much risk are we accepting here
Mm-hmm.
with this, and they have worked all of that.
Okay.
Is there an unknown out there? There will always be that. But you have to accept that if you're gonna fly up there.
Sweet, good way to put it. You met Mr. Musk?
Well, I've been in meetings with him, but I have not had one of these.
Okay. Well, speaking about meetings, tomorrow is an important flight review meeting with NASA and SpaceX for the launch of the Demo 2 next Wednesday. And it's going to be without the guy that was spearheading that, Doug Lavarro, who resigned as NASA's human spaceflight chief. Bob, you said you've been in meetings with Mr. Lavarro. What's behind that, and is this going to affect the confidence in the launch at all?
Well, the answer to the last question, no.
Good.
It won't. The people that are going to pull off this launch are the ones that are out there now preparing the spacecraft, the Dragon and Falcon, and that have been reviewing all of the work leading up to this launch for years, not for the last few months.
Right, he's only been on board the last 3 or 4 months.
And it's like any other management job, you're only as good as your team. Well, the team's ready to do this. The SpaceX NASA team is ready to do this. Yes, somebody's got to make the final decision and check the block, but it's kind of like the launch director job. When it gets down to the end, you have to have someone that has a go, no-go authority. And saying no is never easy to do when you're really close to a launch, regardless of what you're responsible for. But again, the team will give you the right advice.
Good. Well, that's some confidence there. A couple fun things. Did you have any more you'd like to add about the private industry? I have this impression that when Blue Origin starts launching this new Glenn rocket, people's minds are going to be blown by what Bezos is coming up with. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, I think you're right. We'll wait and see, but yeah. I
It's,
think
well,
because
one reason it's an 18-foot diameter rocket, and the Falcon 9's 13.
it's
And it's a
it's
bigger.
it's a bigger rocket. It's a very different, spaceship, so to
Uh-huh.
speak, capsule type of thing. And yeah, and I'm not
I
sure.
can't
that,
wait.
And I'm not familiar with the intricacies of it, but I'm sure there's a lot of out of the box, so to speak, type of
Uh-huh.
capabilities that he's going to bring forward.
So what are we seeing with the private industry now taking over space program, with NASA becoming much like the FAA, Federal Aviation Association, was in the 30s and 40s, overseeing the burgeoning airline industry? Is that a good analogy?
I think it is for low Earth orbit and actually the lunar activities. Someone still has to be enabling that and doing the upfront research as you continue to go further out in space. There's more things you have to conquer from a technology standpoint and from a physiology standpoint, the body. And so NASA's still going to have to be involved, because some agency, government agency, has got to accept the risk, the financial risk of doing that kind of research.
Mm-hmm.
But the commercial people can pull it off once you get the technology readiness level, so to speak, to the point where it's relatively easy to do.
Mm-hmm. Good. Marty's making a few notes. I see Eamon Gregan in Ireland is eating his supper watching us here, and we're grateful for that. Robert Laws is in Scotland, a big follower of us. A lot of people around the country watching us, and please tell your friends to rewatch this, because we've heard a lot of good stuff here. We've got your most memorable mission, Bob. I think you were talking was 26, the return to flight, but any others really stick out?
Well, probably my first mission always is there, because that was Gemini 3.
Oh.
And I remember the first time I went in the blockhouse and to go to my console and plug in my headset and open up my procedure. So I went in there with the lead engineer at the time, which was the person that succeeded me as launch director before Challenger.
Mm-hmm.
Took me in the blockhouse, and I remember walking in the door of the blockhouse and seeing these people sitting at these consoles with the headsets on. There's all these lights on, and there's this murmur of activity in there. And I'm sure I just stood there and did that like a little kid,
Yeah.
And I still
Never seen anything like that.
I'd never seen anything like
Yeah.
that before, and I just kind of dumbfounded. And this voice on the console to my right stood up. Well, a person did. I didn't see him, but I heard the voice first. He said, "Sit down and put your headset on, son."
Who was that? Ike Ridgel?
That was George Page.
Oh, George Page.
The
Okay.
first shuttle launch director.
Yeah, George Page here. Yeah, well, that's interesting. He's rather a tall man, right?
He was the big guy.
He's a big guy, so you've done. Well, that's a good one. Thank you for that question. Major differences, Bob, between SpaceX and NASA's launch procedures.
Well, it's the most recent launch procedures that NASA did were the result of very lengthy meetings, paper copies like this, and NASA managed, and even before you got to launch countdown, all the procedures for doing the work on the shuttle and the processing were paper procedures approved by NASA engineers, and as well as the contractor. Nowadays it doesn't work that way. NASA approves the procedures by the process. The oversight is not there, is the best way to put it, for a commercial crew. It's not there. NASA provides oversight by accepting the material that's proof that the contractor has done this job.
Checked all the boxes.
Check the boxes, so to speak. Ask the question about the results of it. Show me the results of it. And that's the process, as opposed to sitting side by side, line by line, where, you know, okay, you did this, I saw you do this, you did this, I saw you do this, you did this, I heard you do this, yes, I read the voltage also. That it has gone from oversight to pure insight, other than major decisions, like getting ready for the launch.
Okay.
And the contractor presents their progress, what they've done, whatever, and the NASA is more like a board or a panel. But depending on where you are in the process, the number of participants change. And that's how they approve it. It's
as they will tomorrow at the meeting,
yes,
probably, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, any other, Bob, did you have a favorite astronaut crew?
It's
Of 51 that he launched, come on, give the guy a break. He can't, he's got to get a few more meals out of these guys, right? They got to buy you a dinner once in a while.
It's a, well, there's some astronauts that stand out for various reasons.
Right.
There's, because they're just very unique, and
how about Story Musgrave?
Story Musgrave is the first that comes to mind.
Okay.
He's the guy he's the proverbial piece of work.
Okay.
And he's a genius.
Yeah.
On top of that,
Uh-huh.
with a great sense of humor, and when the flight crews that he flew on would do, and all of the shuttle astronauts would do this, they would go around all the work areas as a crew, or sometimes a single, one or two. When John Young came to any facility down here, work would literally stop, and people would go to talk to John Young, to see John Young, to just say hi, type of thing, and it was just because he's John Young.
Right.
Gemini, Apollo,
Moonwalker.
Shuttle, but Story was he was kind of, any crew that he came on, it was kind of like the Pied Piper.
Six
You know?
of them too.
Yeah, yeah.
6 flights.
And if he was
Pied
either
Piper.
going by himself or he was with the crew, the people would swarm to him, even if he was with the other half a dozen members or whatever on the crew. They want to talk to Story. They want to get a quote from Story. They want to get a tidbit.
His
Story.
I've heard him talk personally some stuff, and one Story Musgrave's favorite stories of I got is his last flight coming on re-entry on the 6th one. He said he wanted to feel gravity taking over his body, so he unstrapped and was floating during the re-entry, the fireball, and he's up there. He floats up because he was below deck as a mission specialist. He wasn't the top 4. And as he floats up there, the commander goes, "What the hell are you doing up here, Story?" And he says, "I'm retiring after this. I want to feel this gravity take on." He tells that story, and I thought, yeah, he wrote a great book too that I've read.
Yes,
on
oh,
it.
yeah.
But any other astronauts stick out? I know you scuba dive with Kathy Thornton. And,
I scuba dive with Buzz.
Buzz Aldrin.
Buzz was a scuba diver, and
Buzz Aldrin, scuba diving revolutionized. Tell us about how he revolutionized the problem with spacewalks.
well, he was the first
GT-12.
astronaut to have what you could classify as a really successful spacewalk. Yeah, Ed White on Gemini.
GT-12.
Yeah, Ed White on Gemini proved, yeah, we can go out there and come back, but I don't know about the ability to work. Well, the next time we tried it with Gene Cernan, I think was next, it didn't work too well. So Buzz went out there after getting this concept of training in the water tank, so to speak, validated. He had the most meaningful early spacewalk. And
They got too overheated and were exerting themselves.
Well,
Their
yeah,
face plates were over.
Well, we're asking them they didn't have the tools,
Yeah.
the proper assist to do anything out there other than float. So Buzz was the one that did the research, that spearheaded getting the right, where to put a handhold, where not to put a handhold, where to put the foot clips and that kind of thing. Kathy Sullivan also scuba diver.
Okay.
And if you're familiar with her biography, she,
Right.
you know, she actually started out in ocean science.
She was on
her
one of
first
Obama's undersecretaries of oceanography, I
for
think.
NOAA, yeah.
Yeah.
But her, initially, she wanted to be an oceanographer, if you read her biography, you know, and then the NASA opportunity came along and put together the best of it, and as a result, as you know, she did the first women's EVA.
Well, we got
for
a
our
question
country.
there. How long did it take to load the external tank? Fuel there.
Well, it usually took 3 hours to load it, and when it was finished, that was about 500,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. You still had to replenish it for a while before it was, the quality of what was in the tank would be homogeneous enough to actually run the engines. So you could say, well, why didn't you launch it, you know, load it for 3 hours and immediately launch the flight crew? Well, it still wasn't able. The quality had to be colder by replenish it for a longer period of time.
Now that's a good question, because one, they're loading, SpaceX is loading the fuel after the astronauts get
Right.
in, and it's even more super cooled at 400 and some below zero
Right.
to get more in there, right?
Exactly. So the shuttle, the problem with the shuttle system, the issue I always had with shuttle was it's the design. You had to expose the crew. You had to load the tank, then you had to replenish it. So, and then you're loading it at thousands of gallons a minute, obviously. So you want the crew, you don't want the crew to be out there under hazardous exposure for too long. But so here you're sending the flight crew out and a closeout crew. You've got a tank out there that's got 500,000 gallons of propellant in it, and you're replenishing it because of the heat, the boil off, and you're replenishing it at the rate of sometimes hundreds of gallons a minute, simultaneously, liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. Tank's already full, about 500,000 gallons, and now you're sending a flight crew and a closeout crew in this hazardous environment, and they're going to spend 3 hours out there. Closeout crew will leave earlier, but if it was a long launch window, the astronauts are out there for another couple of hours
Right.
in this hazardous exposure with no way to get out of the spacecraft if something goes wrong other than run out and go down the slide wire. Comfortably, you know, now
Zip line.
commercial, you get the crew out there, you get everything powered up, you get everything operating properly, then you send the astronauts out, they get in, the closeout crew leaves, and you got 45 minutes of exposure of loading the tank and flying it, and the crew has the ability to get out in an orderly manner. They have the ability to get out on slide wires, or they could punch the escape rock for the spacecraft and get out. I consider that, from a safety standpoint, safer than what we did in the shuttle program.
I know we're having a long program here, but it's worth it. I wanted to ask you another question. There were 6 aborts within the last 5-6 seconds of launch, I believe, that once the 6.7 seconds, I think
right,
Marty
yeah.
told me, the SRBs start firing off. Did you have one of those 6 aborts?
Yes,
That had to
yeah.
be really nervous.
Well, the very first one was a real, because we had practiced the emergency egress for the shuttle, but we really never wanted to do it.
Yeah, right. Like the
and-
return to flight to the Kennedy, right?
Yeah. And so the first time it actually happened, when it wasn't a flight readiness firing, now we'd practiced our safety procedures in flight readiness firing, so we knew that the system would respond to the computer commands to save things. But that was without a crew on board. And the very first one, not only was it unexpected, the crew was on board, but we had a fire because in the nozzle of one of the main engines because the fuel valve didn't close all the way. So we had a hydrogen fed fire in one of the engine nozzles down there because it was draining the fuel out of the line. That's right through the engine. And
I have to look up do you remember what one that was?
It was
is there 51
51 something.
51C or D?
It was
B. You did all the 51s.
It was Gordon.
Yeah, we
it was
can
Gordon Fullerton, I think, was
yeah.
the. But anyway, so there was not a debate, but there was a instantaneous. Should we tell the crew to do what was called a mode 1 egress, which is just throw the hatch open, run across the swing arm, and get in the baskets and get out of there. But we didn't do that. We turned the water on, and we thought we'd put the fire out, but the water was masking the fire detectors. It was a hydrogen-fed fire. Wow. It was just like the engine was still running, so to speak, but there was no thrust because the liquid oxygen wasn't coming through that. The pumps were turned off, but the hydrogen was burning in the oxygen environment. So we turned on the water. Fire detectors went out and said, well, good, we put the fire out. Well, we turned the water off, and the fire detectors came back on. Oh. And they because the fire burned until all of the amount of propellant in the line actually drained out. But when it was all said and done, we did an orderly egress for the flight crew. But
tense time.
But we did soul searching after that. We did a lessons learned. Did we really do the right thing? Mm-hmm. And are we really prepared for the next time it happened? And we made some changes as a result.
Good. And those are some edgy ones on
you there. You learn by those things that don't go well.
That's right. Well, we're going to wind it up here with just a 41D is 41D. What Iman in Ireland. Thank you, Iman in Ireland. 41D. Okay. I don't have that was Gordon Fullerton's flight, like you said, probably. Yeah. Who is also part of the ALT, the shuttle. Approach and landing test, right?
Right, yes,
was on there with Hayes.
Sure was.
Well, a little bit of this man, had to blow off some steam, and I know that he loves race cars, you sports car friends out there, and I'd say that you know about every turn in Sebring out there, blindfolded.
Daytona, yes, yeah.
In there, and what
Many
kind
years.
of, tell us about your little moments of racing cars around some
well, racing was probably, that's why my family put up with it, because it was my escape from the other, my day job, I'll call it, okay?
And what sports cars you like?
Well, I raced, I first raced open wheel cars, like an Indianapolis car, but they had 50 horsepower as opposed to 850 horsepower.
Oh, okay.
And then, but as time went by, I decided I'm not young and immortal anymore, so I want a car that has a roll cage in it and fenders and this kind of thing. So I raced Nissans, Datsuns, Mazdas, Hondas in sports cars, road racing. Racing. Did
you ever do the Daytona 24-hour?
Not the 24, but the same track a number of times. So it's not just oval racing round and round. A track like Sebring, you'll shift gears 20 times and that kind of thing. But I always did all my own work on the car. So
cool.
My excuse for racing as a hobby was I didn't have the time or money for any other bad habits, and it kept me at home. Where's Dad? Where's Bob? Well, he's out in the garage working on the car. He may race another 2 or 3 weekends, but at least he's out there. And when I went racing, it's an amateur sport. If you win, you get a $5 trophy and bragging rights.
Cool.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And did you meet any, I asked you there if you ever met Paul Newman or any people like that?
Newman and Tom Cruise did it also yes, a few times, but and I actually raced against Tom Cruise.
Oh, cool.
A couple of races, yeah. In fact, it was the Paul Newman racing team that sponsored, so to speak, his cars and his travel.
Well, I missed the Indy 500 this time of year, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I missed the Sebring 12-hour down there. I always went there as a course worker and party.
Well, we've appreciated having Bob Sieck here, a man like no equal really of what he's done and what you know in there. I would like for you to, I know that you're going to end with that little phrase there that I love for you saying there. But I want you to say something about the American Space Museum and what it means to you and the work our volunteers are doing here that you're a major part with.
Well, you know, this museum is unique because it tells the stories of the workers in all of our not only the unmanned but predominantly our human spaceflight programs, and it's represented by the tools in a lot of cases that they use, the hardware that they put their hands on, the procedures that they use. This tells the worker's story, and that makes it unique. It's not, yes, there's astronauts, but it's not all about the astronauts. It's not all about the rocket. It's not all about the spacecraft. It's about the team and what they accomplish with equipment like this, or those tools over there, or that equipment over there, or that replica of a crane over there. And you know, and Alan Shepard said it best after he received accolades from one of his space flight missions, you know, the celebrity status of the astronauts. He said, you got to remember, you know, and he's really addressing the media here. He said, not enough is said about the work that make our successes that we all enjoy possible. More should be said about the workers. Well, this museum makes a statement about the workers, and that's why it's unique.
And Space View Park with all the names of the workers out there too.
And the monuments.
The handprints of 40-some astronauts among the workers is so cool out there.
Yeah.
Bob, what's your inspiration for the youth of today? And I'll let him conclude.
Celebrating, you know, the 50th anniversary of Apollo, and talked to a lot of people, and they said, well, gee, you know, how did you do this 50 years ago? We said, well, we learned by doing. We didn't have the tools that you folks have today, so you, particularly you kids, you know, wherever you are in the academic process, now you have all these incredible tools that, you know, and you know, you've got more electronics in your pocket or your purse than the crude computers that we used back then. I said, but remember, that's just data. It's not information per se, it's just data. So fine, use those tools to collect data, but don't forget how to Google your brain.
Google your brain, friends out there, to help you stay curious. From Bob Sieck, the one and only. We appreciate you being here, Bob. I know a lot of people enjoyed that.
Well, this is one of my favorite places.
Pleasure to know you.
I just don't get here often enough.
Well, like I said, it's a wonderful, the amount of volunteer work he does in all of his things. So with that, I'm going to conclude. Google your brain. Come back with us tomorrow, where we hope you stay curious. I'm Mark Marquette. Hope you enjoyed this special program. And Marty and I talked about Friday, we're going to come to you from Apollo, the Apollo Monument out there, because you certainly knew Gene Cernan, and Tom Stafford is still your friend around the area.
Yeah.
And John Young. We're all headed up to the moon 51 years ago today.
Absolutely.
On Apollo 10.
Yeah.
And have you seen the general lately? Tom Stafford, is he doing good?
Not recently. It's been a few months, but last reports were he's still Tom.
Good. That's good. He's 90 years old, I think.
It's just a number.
Well, we appreciate you being here today. Marty, anything else to questions?
Nope.
He's ready to sign out. Thank you all very much. Please tell your friends to look us up, and they can see this wonderful interview with Bob Sieck at another time. Until then, it's Mark Marquette telling you to stay curious.
Absolutely.